Good evening, it's the VC Andrews Critiquer, seer of past, present, and future. I now predict that you will recommend my YouTube channel to all your friends and family and... I can dream, can't I? But then again, maybe pretending you can be psychic isn't the best thing to do. I mean, it sure didn't look out for the protagonist of the film I'm reviewing today. That being Nightmare Alley. It's the story of Stan, a basically good-hearted guy working as a carny that happens to be the home of the greatest fortune teller on Earth, Madame Xena. And I don't call her that on account of her psychic abilities. Like most fortune tellers, she doesn't actually have any, but she does have a frickin' ingenious code system of articulation and pronunciation that allows for verbatim readings of the questions that were put into her question box. Stan wants in on their secret, but Xena says that's remaining solely between she and her husband. Until they need retirement funds anyway. But fate has other plans, as when Stan accidentally gives the old man wood alcohol instead of real alcohol, he gets an early retirement, just not quite as pleasant as the one he was hoping for. At any rate, Xena needs a new assistant, so she lets Stan in on her secret. But Stan decides, why should he keep making chump change as a carny assistant with this secret when he can make a fortune entertaining in higher society? So he and his new girlfriend Molly steal Madame Xena's act and go on the open road, performing it in fancy nightclubs to great success. But this newfound fame quickly causes Stan to become more and more greedy and narcissistic, which is pushed to the max when he meets an equally corrupt psychologist who uses her patients' deepest and darkest secrets they revealed to her to blackmail them into paying her more than they bargained for. And seeing how he's a phony mind reader and she has confidential info on a number of people, the two rogues decide to do business together. But Molly's starting to grow wary of her boyfriend's growing narcissism, especially when he thinks to convincing a depressed man that he can resurrect his dead wife. Plus, the therapist shows she may be even more of a Nurse Ratched than he thought. Yeah, of course I mean she double-crosses him, but you all saw that coming, didn't you? Anyway, the story is nothing special, nor has it ever been particularly popular. Hell, both movies were box office bombs, but special or not, it does provide an effective commentary on the corruption that comes with massive success in attempting to play God. Plus, both films do indeed have pretty respectable Rotten Tomatoes scores. Still, which one showcases the corruption of fame better? Well, let me predict in my crystal... Actually, maybe that's not such a good idea. I don't want to end up like Stan. Let me do a review of these two adaptations of William Grisham's novel to find that out instead. This is old versus new, Nightmare Alley. My personal favorite type of anti-heroes are those that start out as good people but then fall down the path of darkness. These are some of the most complex characters in all of media, and our anti-hero Stan Carlisle sure doesn't disappoint in that field in either version. So let's see which one did it a little bit better with Best Stan. Stanton Carlisle, or Stan for short, is played respectively by Tyrone Power and Bradley Cooper. Both Stans do indeed have very natural corruption phases, where he starts out as a somewhat greedy but still overall decent guy. But once he learns the secret to probably the greatest psychic magic trick in existence, not only does he become a greedy narcissist, but Power soon goes to his head with this newfound ability to persuade folks that he knows their deepest, darkest secrets, and of course exploits that power like mad. Only to learn soon later that he's not the only one who's manipulating around here. Still, which one is ultimately better? Well, both actors did their job, but this was fairly easy to pick. For me, the better Stan was Tyrone Power. I just felt his performance was more natural, to his only slight narcissism at the beginning.
Been on the move. See those yokels out there? It gives you sort of a superior feeling, as if you were in the know and they were on the outside looking in. Kind of hard to explain, but I don't like it.
To his narcissism around the middle that almost makes Cartman look humble by comparison.
Go for it. He stood there and shook like a leaf. Her heart like a broken doll. Crawled on his hands and knees to me and begged me to get some message or other from this Dory.
I know what I'm doing. I don't need any help from a couple of cheap carnival freaks. We'll peddle your stuff where it belongs.
Hell, even Cartman would be disgusted with how much of an asshole this dude is. Maybe even Frank Gallagher would. Bradley Cooper's a good actor, don't get me wrong, but I just didn't feel that natural despicability from him that I did with Power.
Manners, friend. What was that? You should say, please. You got a scooter line, but you run a racket. Same as me.
Is that what this is?
See what I mean? He's trying, I can tell. He just doesn't come off as much of a Frank Gallagher as Power did, nor were his lines quite as selfish. So I didn't want to strangle him almost every second he was on screen like I did in the original. And that's kind of ironic because Cooper Stan does do more evil things than Powers. Not only does he cheat on Molly with Dr. Ritter with no regrets at all, but when one of his scams is exposed, which I'll detail later, not only does he beat the client to death, unlike the original where it was never confirmed if he actually died, but he also runs over the client's best friend who's the only witness. Hell, he's even revealed to have killed his own father via arson. Don't ask why, the more mystery, the more we detest the dude. But yeah, as horrible as those things were, I just found myself loathing the original Stan more so. Plus, he just seems to be a slightly better manipulator. We see several scenes of him attempting to seduce Madame Xena to tell him the code early in the movie, something Bradley Cooper never did. Well, he actually did have an affair with Madame Xena in one scene, but it was before he even knew about the code, so at least the affair was out of genuine attraction to her rather than manipulation. It still doesn't make seducing a married woman okay, but it's still not as bad as being both a cheater and a gold digger. Or when Molly's having a guilty conscience about preying upon people's weaknesses, she says that Stan is borderline pretending to be God with this whole deal. Stan's in like, no, I haven't once compared myself to God. Sure, I've pretended to be all-knowing, being able to raise people from the dead and deserving of everyone's respect, but I've never once directly said, I'm God. The idiots we're conning are happy, so God will be happy with me too. And guess what he says to top it all off?
And I'll tell you what the third commandment is too. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. A lot of people think that means swearing, but I'll tell you what it means. It means exactly what you're talking about.
What a self-righteous dick. So yeah, even though Bradley Cooper gave a fine performance and does have a longer list of crimes, he never quite made Stan deserving of the hatred that Tyrone Power did. Put simply, Tyrone Power was just more mad with power. You've heard worse.
Point goes to the old.
Why are you doing this?
When your quote-unquote hero is considered, well, anything but heroic, you have to work extra hard to make your villain especially diabolical so that they even can be considered a villain compared to your hero. And thankfully, both films did a respectable job at that. But still, which film did it better? Well, let's find out with Best Bitch Therapist. I don't usually like to use such harsh language in my reviews, but there's simply no other word to describe this horrid woman that's formerly known as Dr. Lilith Ritter. I mean, you have to be pretty low to blackmail your patients with their personal info that they trusted you with, but at the same time, you can't help but be just a little impressed with how skilled she is at manipulating. When you first see Dr. Ritter, you can easily see why so many people have trusted her with their personal info. She seems like she wouldn't even judge a pedophile as long as they said sorry. Plus, her chemistry with Stan does initially feel very real, like she genuinely cares for her partner in crime. This of course comes back to bite him when he realizes that she was just feeding his ego the entire time to ensure he'd make her a fortune, and that he probably shouldn't have been so open about his scamming and accidental murder with a therapist who blackmails her patients by recording what they reveal to her. But I digress. Which one is the better villainess? Unlike with Stan, this was a pretty close pick because both Helen Walker and Cate Blanchett totally nailed her manipulative, cold-blooded bitchery. But since I am comparing the two, I've got to go with Cate Blanchett in the remake. Mostly because she just had this beyond disturbing sociopathic nature to her.
Blood. She'll need blood in her hands and dress. More shocking the image, the less inclined Ezra will be to examine it. Oh, Stan! You take my breath away!
And make no mistake, Helen Walker's Dr. Ritter was corrupt and sadistic as hell.
You told me you gave him that bottle of wood alcohol yourself. I suppose that was just another one of your homicidal hallucinations, wasn't it? Or was the homicide a reality, too?
But never quite at a sociopathic level. I couldn't see her ever willingly murdering anybody. With Blanchett, it wouldn't surprise me if she nuked an entire country just for a joke. That Blanchett just seems slightly more conniving than Walker. Like when she first meets Stan, she suspected he was using a verbal code right from the very beginning and tried to expose him by asking the question herself of what's in her handbag to throw him off guard. But thankfully for Stan, he was able to correctly guess a pistol based on how she was clutching her hand while talking to him, so he stereotypically guessed that she got a pistol to protect herself since she didn't have a husband to do so. Sexist, huh? Also, remember how I said Dr. Ritter pretended to have a very genuine bond with Stan in both movies? That is true indeed, but in the original, it always felt platonic. In the remake, however, she freaking seduces him, really going the extra mile to ensure she has him secured in his clutches. But what really seals it for me is, Blanchett implies that her motives are actually just for a kick rather than financial gain.
You don't even care about the money?
No, you're right. Your money doesn't matter to me. But it means everything to you, doesn't it? You're a small man.
Again, both Dr. Ritters were absolutely horrible people, even more so than Stan, but Cate Blanchett just barely takes home the gold. She was just more sociopathic, more cunning, and with a motive of screwing Stan over just for her own amusement, just overall slightly more evil.
Point goes to the noob.
Will you get out of here? I should have known you were that kind of...
With Stan being so unlikable, you may be wondering, what's there even to really get invested with in this story? Well, thankfully, Stan does have a love interest who has a heart of gold, so we have at least one protagonist to give a crap about. So let's see which one we should give a crap about more with Bess Molly. Yes, Molly, our good protagonist, is the female love interest and embodied conscience to our anti-hero Stan. Only downside is... that's really all there is to her character. Yeah, even though she has a decent amount of screen time, there's hardly any time devoted in either film to fleshing out her character. I guess the filmmakers felt they should go the extra mile to remove any negative traits from her, to compensate for the fact that the other protagonist was such an inhuman bastard, and we'd have at least one protagonist to root for. But again, they went a bit too far with this and left her with virtually no traits at all. But I still have to pick one of them, so which incarnation of Molly is... well, less bland, I guess. Personally, I feel that would be Colleen Gray in the original. The main reason being is that Gray just had this natural endearingness to her, kind of like another Stan's girlfriend Wendy Testaberger in the early seasons of South Park.
You're not sorry?
I should say not.
Not one bit?
Why should I be? I've never been so tickled in my life.
What are you shaking for?
I don't know. I'm not scared anymore. I don't know what it is.
See what I mean? Like the original Wendy, she's still bland, but she's just such a sweetheart you can't help but smile at her. Rooney Mara's performance is perfectly fine, but she just feels like an average gal, so there's really not much to get invested in with her. Another problem I have with Mara is, she hardly expresses any guilt over the scamming she's doing. Like when she's threatening to leave Stan, it seems like it has more to do with him having an affair with Dr. Ritter than the fact that he's a con artist playing on the heartstrings of desperate, gullible people. And this lack of guilt unintentionally makes the new Molly less sympathetic. When the original Molly was threatening to leave Stan, she had a pretty powerful scene when she was realizing just how immoral their business practice really was, and how God might not be too happy with them on their judgment day. Now let's talk about that scene where Stan's biggest deal yet gets ruined that I briefly mentioned earlier. Basically, Stan gets hired by a doctor that I'll talk more about a little later to resurrect the spirit of his dead wife. Even though it's seemingly out of Stan's scamming capabilities, the doc offers him an amount he can't refuse. And lucky for Stan, Molly just happens to bear more than a little resemblance to the doc's late wife. Molly reluctantly goes along with the scam at first, but compare the scenes in both movies where she breaks down, and tell me which one you think was letting out guilt that had been building up for several weeks.
Oh, Dory. Dory, God.
I can't.
No,
I
Dory.
can't.
Never shown mercy to anyone.
No! I can't stand. I can't.
What happened?
Not even for you.
Now her ultimate fate is a tad subjective, so I'd rather wait until the best story round to discuss it. But on the whole, even though neither Molly really had any identity outside of being the girlfriend and moral compass for Stan, I do feel Colleen Gray conveyed these limited character traits in a stronger manner than Rooney Mara, so her take does come off as more memorable at the end of the day.
Point goes to the old.
Go away.
Like I recently mentioned in my Music Man review, every con artist needs hapless suckers to support his cause of making him frickin' rich, as well as to bring him to his senses. Now, regardless of how successful that last attempt I mentioned is, let's take a look at Best Supporting Cast. Not much can be said about the supporting cast since both movies stay largely within the perspective of Stan, Dr. Ritter, and Molly, but the side characters do have stuff to offer. I suppose we should start with Madame Xena, the fortune teller who Stan borrowed this ingenious articulation system from. I personally feel it's a tie. Both are generally kind-hearted individuals who love their husbands, though apparently not enough to not have affairs with Stan, and love Stan enough to have almost no problem with him stealing her life's work, and even tries to warn him that one of her tarot cards, that she does believe in apparently, shows him hanging like it did for Pete just before he died, only it turned out to be a bit more metaphorical with Stan. Anyway, there's really nothing to distinguish either version, so I'm calling a tie with Xena. But on the whole, I personally feel the remake ultimately has the better supporting cast. They just offer us a little more than in the original. Like, compare Xena's late husband, Pete. The original is mostly just a drunken crank who tells Stan to piss off when he tries to ask him about the code. But in the remake, while still a pathetic alcoholic, he actually is a pretty pleasant dude for the most part. He actually does teach Stan a little of the code, but not too much, warning him that the knowledge will likely lead to him believing that he really does possess the psychic gift he claims to possess.
And then you lie. You lie. And when the lies end, there it is. The face of God staring at you straight. No man can outrun God, Stan.
Kind of foreshadows what's to come with Stan. What about the shady carnival manager who plays a part in influencing Stan towards the wrong path? The one in the original is delightfully slimy, no doubt.
But beneath that shaggy mane of hair lies the brain of a beast. Look! If he should as much as sink his teeth into my arm, nothing on this round green earth could save me.
But the one in the remake is played by William Dafoe and...
Come on! You gonna wait? Answer questions? No, they'll take them. They'll care for them. Put them under the... Don't pretend you give a shit with me. You hungry? I'm starving. Come on! Steak and eggs on me!
Yeah, he's no Dafoe. Plus, Dafoe's character is slightly more developed, where we see he's even more of a crooked, manipulative monster than we imagined. Apparently his method of securing his most popular attraction of geeks... no, geeks in this case are supposedly savage people who eat live chickens and other animals, is basically by convincing broke and alcoholic bums that it'll just be a quick side gig until they secure a better job, but then drugs their food with opium so they'll be complacent and willing to work for him below minimum wage for the rest of their lives. Plus, what the hell is up with some of these attractions he has? I guess some of that goblin gas is still coursing through Dafoe's brain cells. What about the doctor I mentioned earlier who wants Stan to resurrect his deceased wife? Oh, and his name is Dr. Ezra Grindle, which I don't believe I mentioned yet. Well, in both versions, when he first meets Stan, he smells BS and tries to prove him a fraud, albeit in private, only for Stan to start talking about his dearly departed wife thanks to info from Dr. Ritter. And of course, this prompts him to want to pay Stan an arm and a leg to bring her back. The only difference is, in the original all these scenes are paraphrased in just a roughly 3-minute conversation Stan has with Dr. Ritter, where the remake actually shows us these scenes. Now the performances themselves are really good in both movies, as I'm sure you remember from the clips I showed you of him breaking down to Molly pretending to be his wife, but since film is a visual medium where you show and don't tell, I say point to the remake. Plus, the fact that he tried to catch Stan with a lie detector and Stan actually managed to beat it is just... Stan, you're just so awful, but you're also just so awesome. Let's see, is there anyone else worth mentioning? I don't feel the other carnies are relevant enough for me to go into detail, but the remake does introduce some new characters that do show how Stan's corrupt business practices are having consequences. Like there's this rich lady who wants to communicate with her dead son who apparently committed suicide when his father forced him to go into the army. Stan says he told him to tell her not to be sad because they'll all be reunited in heaven one day. While this was a seemingly harmless gesture, it prompts the wife to... want a bit of an earlier reunion than she and her husband probably had anticipated. And like said before, the remake gives Dr. Grindle a colleague and best friend that Stan kills as the only witness to him attacking the doc. He helps showcase how Stan is growing more and more corrupt. And I guess I might as well mention the sheriff who tries to shut down the carnival early in the movie due to animal cruelty. Yes, he's totally in the right in both movies, but the original is more of a smug asshole in power about it, so it was more satisfying to see Stan own him by giving him a psychic reading. So point to the original with him, but it still isn't enough to outclass the side characters of the remake. The performances may be really damn good in both movies, but mostly for having more purpose in the story, New will take this point.
Point goes to the New.
You got a nerve, young fella.
With the score all tied up, let's get into our final round. There's really no point comparing the stories because they're already so damn similar to one another, and most of the differences I've already mentioned in the character rounds, so instead we'll be looking at which film gave Stan the fate he ultimately deserved. This is Best Ending for the win!
The finales of both movies are very similar. After being beaten at his own con game by Dr. Ritter, Stan, like many celebrities whose careers hit rock bottom, winds up homeless, alcoholic, and miserable. Eventually he tries to get his life together by pitching his psychic act to a new carnival. The manager says no, claiming fortune-telling acts aren't hip anymore, but Stan pleads him to give him a job, any job. So the manager's like, okay, I do have one job for you. It's not perfect, but it's satisfactory. Stan likes where things are going, until the manager reveals that the job itself is to be a geek. This line in the remake doesn't ease the situation much, needless to say.
Of course, it's only temporary. Just until we get a real geek.
Sounds like Defoe left a legacy. Nice. Anyway, the remake ends with Stan laughing maniacally at this cruel twist of fate for him, but the original has a little more to offer. After a period of time in this horrible job that makes being a janitor seem like a rocket scientist, Stan really does turn insane and goes on a rampage. The carnival staff can't restrain him, but Molly turns out to have landed a job at the exact same carnival. El coincidence. She calms Stan down and says she'll be there to look after him. Stan then comes to his senses, taking comfort that he at least has Molly again in this otherwise horrible life. You might argue that Stan's 100% horrible fate in the remake was more fitting considering how horrible of a person Stan was. However, there was one little thing I forgot to mention. Just after leaving Dr. Ritter's office after being betrayed, Stan actually gave all of his remaining money that the evil doctor had stolen from him to Molly to live off of until she was able to secure a new job. He could have easily just kept it to sustain himself, but the fact that he gave everything he had left to his girlfriend was a really selfless and awesome move on Stan's part. Granted, the new Molly left Stan right after he killed Dr. Grindle, so he never even got the chance to do this good deed. But the fact still remains that you get what you give in the world. Both Stans did countless awful things, but the original Stan did do one selfless thing, so he got a little comfort in his otherwise terrible life with Molly being back in it. The new Stan didn't do anything genuinely selfless, so he got nothing. So, I gotta call it a tie. Stan's fate was fitting with his actions in each movie. So yeah, I guess this is just one of those instances like my Fright Night or Worst Witch review. Some things about the original are better, and some things about the remake are better, and ultimately, neither one quite outshines the other. Some of you may prefer one version over the other, but for me personally, they're both just as good.
Point goes to both, meaning the match also ends in a tie.
I've never been so tickled in my life.
It's not good enough for me.